Yes, and the program continues this morning on Salam Media and Al Ansar. Now, looking at the Al Jazeera website, Malian troops plan transitional government, the African bloc to send envoys. Coup leaders say transitional president from civilian or military ranks to be appointed as ECOWAS plans a delegation. This follows a coup that took place in that country this week, the removal of the incumbent president there, Boubacar Keïta. And I'm joined online now by analyst and keen follower of politics on the African continent, Aisha Kaji. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, we seem to have a network connection problem here with Aisha Kaji. And let's try and see if she can log back on and continue with the discussion. She is a South African based consultant on governance as well as human rights and educational issues. Previously served as the executive director of the Freedom of Expression Institute and as the first director of the International Human Rights Exchange at Wits University in South Africa, Johannesburg. Many are saying that the time for coups on the African continent are over. There's been international condemnation of what has taken place. The United Nations has joined the global community in condemning the military takeover in Mali, which saw President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta forced to resign at gunpoint. They have now, the coup leaders and military leaders have vowed to keep him safe and to allow people to continue with their work. They're saying that neighboring countries are overreacting for fears that similar sentiments could spread in their countries, and that everything is calm right now in Mali. And I see that we are joined once again by Aisha. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me, Azhar.
All right, quickly, what's taking place in Mali thus far? What do we know?
Well, it's a military coup that took place on Tuesday, as you said, but it's actually the culmination of about 8 years of unrest in Mali, particularly in northern Mali, which at one stage was even calling for secession from the rest of the country. So this is not a recent problem. It is the culmination, as I said, of many years of insecurity in parts of the country, lack of state capacity, and of course, foreign intervention in this country.
When we say foreign intervention, we know that France has a considerable amount of troops there. They've been engaging in what they believe to be, or what they say is anti-terror operations against extremist groups. But we also know that this is a highly resource-rich country.
Mali, as you know, has considerable resources, particularly gold resources. And it is also a country that is extremely poor despite these resources as a result of corruption by the state, but also, as you've indicated, as a result of foreign intervention and the continuing presence of the French, both politically in the country. The French were the previous colonizers of this part of Africa, or much of this part of Africa, and they've kept a stranglehold on both its politics and its security situation, and of course on its economic trajectory as well. So the French are increasingly becoming very, very resented in Mali, particularly in the north and even in the central part of the country. And what has happened as a result of both the French and then later the UN intervention? Remember that the French intervention in 2012, 2013, when the so-called jihadist insurgency or Salafist insurgency first began in the country, or first began to have teeth in the country, that French intervention originally was not even sanctioned by the UN. It was retrospectively sanctioned by the UN. And initially, some Malians welcomed it because of the political instability. But what the French presence has actually done is it has, in a sense, exacerbated tensions, ethnic tensions for one, between the northern Tuareg and the more settled pastoral farmers in the central part of the region, between the so-called rebel groups, including Ansar ad-Din and other offshoots of the former Al Qaeda in the Maghreb, etc. So this is a situation that has really gotten out of hand. There are also in recent years inter-ethnic tensions between groups in the central part of Mali, particularly amongst the Dogon tribes and the Fulani, who have been a receptacle because of the dissatisfaction of young Fulani youth in Mali. They've been an easy target for the so-called Islamists or the so-called Salafists militias to recruit from. And as a result, the Dogon farmers have formed their own militias in retaliation. And there have been some bloody massacres in the past few years in that part of the country as well. So more and more of Mali appears to be becoming politically and in a security sense unstable, despite the presence of over 15,000 UN troops in the country.
Now, Aisha, we've seen condemnation coming from the UN, from regional partners, and from the globe now with regards to military takeovers and coups being led in Mali. But on the other hand, for example, if maybe you can draw a parallel for us, in Sudan, we had the coup against Umar al-Bashir not too long ago, and that was almost celebrated to a certain extent. But is there more to it? Is it really about objecting to military coups, or is it because we don't like you and you're not our friend, and Boubacar Keïta here is our friend and we don't want you to be coupping him, for example?
Well, there's a bit of both. Look, Mr. Keïta was twice elected in fairly free elections. However, the parliamentary elections that happened in March this year were widely deemed within the country and the region to not have been fair. In fact, ECOWAS asked Mr. Keïta, or IBK as he's popularly known by his initials, asked him to actually run a rerun of the parliamentary elections, which hasn't happened. And so since those election results were announced in late May, since then there have been demonstrations by civil society groups in Mali. So there's definite civilian unrest and dislike for Mr. Keïta's government, largely on the grounds that it is corrupt. On the other side of that coin, though, is that this area of Africa, West Africa in particular, was for many years post-independence a sort of breeding ground for coup after coup after coup. And ECOWAS and the African Union took a sensible decision to not tolerate military coups in the region. So this is a different kind of setup from what has happened in Sudan recently, because the Bashir government in Sudan had a stranglehold on power for many, many decades. And the coup which overthrew the Bashir government was widely celebrated, both in Sudan, in the region, and internationally. In West Africa, the history of coups has been that the military takeovers inevitably lead, unfortunately, to authoritarian governments, governments which are by and large very corrupt, and also governments which unfortunately do not actually do very much for the majority of the people who live in abject poverty. So the widespread condemnation by ECOWAS and the stance it's taken over the last decade or so to not allow any coups, to suspend membership of ECOWAS, and in the African Union's case, to suspend membership of the African Union of any country that engages in a coup, is actually a good, strong decision. However, in the case of Mali, there may be a case to be made that because Mr. Keïta has not actually responded to calls from ECOWAS regarding rerunning the parliamentary elections, regarding issues of corruption, etc., that there is a need for some kind of transitional government. He has now stepped down. The spiritual leader of the opposition groups in Mali, Imam Mahmoud Diko, has said that he does not want to run for political office. So there is a leadership vacuum of sorts in the country at the moment. ECOWAS has been meeting virtually. They've been having a virtual conference and are preparing to step in. It remains to be seen exactly what they will be able to negotiate in the days to come.
Finally, Aisha, just to it's difficult to see into the future, but from what you can gauge on the ground there, do you think there'll be a peaceful resolution and there won't be further or any bloodshed going forward?
I think that the prospects for a peaceful resolution, while there are so many ethnic tensions, intercommunal tensions, and of course, the presence of UN and especially French fighters on the ground, as well as American army installations, etc. The presence for peaceful, the prospects for peaceful resolution are slim, but they must actually be tried for. One of the major issues in this region is the proliferation of small arms that happened after the chaos in Libya about a decade ago. So the area, the whole Sahel region, is awash in illegal small arms particularly, but also some more heavy armaments, things like grenades, hand thrown grenades, machine grenades, some more sophisticated ammunition as well. And really, it appears to me that in the long term, the prospects for peace in Mali are going to be dependent on one of two methods of resolution. One of them would be to basically suppress all the armed insurgency. And we've seen over the last 8 years that that is a short-term resolution, that resolution basically puts down the leaders of groups like Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, but that they resurge under other names. That as long as groups such as Ansar Deen have very strong and long-standing ties with local people, they will rise again. So it basically, the armed intervention serves to suppress in the short term, push the movements underground, and then they rise again because the underlying reasons for their existence have not been addressed. So I would say that what is needed right now is perhaps, yes, some military intervention, but hand in hand with trying to negotiate with the armed groups, which is difficult, I know, both in the center of the country and more particularly amongst the so-called jihadists or Salafists in the north. But it is a necessary step to be taken for long-term stability in this country. Also, the shifts in perspective among groups like Ansar Deen, like JNIM, etc., mean that there are levers that can be used in negotiation to change their perspective. But this is only if there is true political will on the part of the Malian state, and that there is will on the part of the Malian state to invest not only in defense spending, which they've increased in recent years, but also in spending on areas such as health and education, which is difficult in an impoverished country like this. But as you said earlier, it is a country with resources. Those resources need to be redirected appropriately.
Absolutely. Sister Aisha Kaji, independent political analyst, speaking to us about the situation out in Mali. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.